We were in the middle of the elevator when the cables suddenly snapped above us. The sound metal makes when it fails under tension isn't what you'd expect. It doesn't snap cleanly like in the movies. It screams. A high-pitched shriek that burrows into your skull, followed by a grinding whir that makes your teeth ache. I heard that sound at 9:14 a.m. on a Thursday morning, suspended between the 15th and 16th floors of the Meridian Tower, with my boss, Leonard Briggs, and two maintenance workers whose names I didn't know yet but would never forget. The elevator lurched. Not dropped. Lurched, like something massive had just grabbed us from above and shaken us once, hard, before letting go. My coffee hit the ceiling. Leonard grabbed the rail. One of the workers, a kid who couldn't have been older than 22, whispered something that might have been a prayer. Then we dropped 3 feet in a single stomach-flipping instant before the emergency brakes caught us with a metallic scream that I felt in my bones. We hung there, swaying slightly, in absolute silence, except for the creaking of cable somewhere above us in the darkness of the shaft. That's when I looked up and saw the frayed steel threads dangling through the ceiling panel, still spinning slowly from the momentum of whatever had just broken loose up there. I'd worked at Meridian Properties for 6 years, started as a junior analyst, worked my way up to senior project manager, and in all that time, I'd taken that elevator twice a day, 5 days a week, sometimes more. 1,200 trips, give or take. Never a problem. Never even a delay longer than 30 seconds. The Meridian Tower was Leonard's crown jewel, a 43-story mixed-use development in the heart of downtown that he'd personally overseen from groundbreaking to ribbon cutting. He loved to tell the story at company events, how he'd fought the city council for zoning approval, how he'd personally selected every contractor, how the building had come in under budget and ahead of schedule. A testament to doing things right, he'd say, raising his glass. I'd believed him. We all had. That Thursday morning, we'd been heading up to meet with the building inspector for the annual safety certification. Routine stuff. Leonard had asked me to join him, said he wanted me to start learning the compliance side of things. I'd felt honored. I grabbed my laptop bag, my coffee, and stepped into the elevator at 9:12 a.m. The two maintenance workers had joined us on the 7th floor, carrying toolboxes and muttering about a stuck HVAC unit on 18. Normal. Completely, utterly normal. Until it wasn't. Nobody move. Leonard's voice cut through the silence, steady but tight. He was pressed against the back wall, one hand still gripping the rail, the other holding his phone. No signal. Of course there wasn't. We were in a metal box, suspended in a concrete shaft. The kid, I'd later learn his name was Danny Reeves, had gone pale, his eyes locked on the frayed cables visible through the damaged ceiling panel. The other worker, an older guy with gray stubble and a name tag that read Phillips, was already on his knees, prying open the emergency phone panel. How bad is it? I asked, surprised by how calm I sounded. My hands were shaking so hard I had to shove them in my pockets. Leonard didn't answer. He was staring at the cables too, his face doing this thing I'd never seen before, a kind of tightening around the eyes that aged him 10 years in 10 seconds. Phillips, he said quietly. How long have those cables been like that? Phillips didn't look up from the emergency phone. He pressed the call button. Once. Twice. Nothing. Sir, I just handle HVAC. Elevator maintenance is contracted out to... I know who it's contracted to, Leonard snapped. I'm asking you what you see. Phillips finally looked up, looked at the cables, looked at Leonard. Those aren't wear patterns, Mr. Briggs. That's damage. Recent damage. The emergency phone crackled to life before anyone could respond. A woman's voice, tinny and distant. Meridian Security, what's your emergency? Phillips grabbed the receiver. We've got 4 people stuck in elevator 3 between 15 and 16. Emergency brakes engaged. Cables are damaged. Visible fraying. Looks like partial failure of the primary support. A pause. How damaged? Ma'am, I can see individual strands. We need fire rescue up here now. Her voice changed, got sharper. Don't move. Don't touch anything. We're calling it in. Stay on the line. Phillips held the phone against his ear, his jaw working. Danny had slid down to sit on the floor, his toolbox forgotten beside him. Leonard was still staring at the ceiling, and I realized he was doing math in his head. I knew that look. He'd do it during budget meetings, during contract negotiations. His eyes would go distant, and you could practically see the numbers scrolling behind them. When was the last inspection? I asked. Nobody answered. Leonard, when was the last elevator inspection? He blinked, focused on me. 6 months ago. Full certification. They passed with 0 violations. And the cables? Cables are rated for 15 years. These were installed at construction, 8 years ago. The math was easy. 7 years of safety margin. Except we were hanging by threads. Fire rescue arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I counted every second on my watch, focusing on the numbers instead of the creaking sounds the elevator made every time one of us shifted our weight. They came in from above, rappelling down the shaft, and the first thing Captain Rodriguez... Wait, I need to use a different name. The first thing Captain Michael Strauss said when he peered through the escape hatch was, Jesus Christ. Not exactly reassuring. He was a 20-year veteran, stocky and professional, and the fact that he broke protocol to swear told me everything I needed to know about what he saw up there. They rigged us with harnesses one at a time, hauling us up through the hatch and into the shaft, where we climbed a service ladder to the 16th floor. Danny went first, then Phillips, then me. Leonard went last. By the time we were all standing in the corridor, surrounded by firefighters and building security and a growing crowd of office workers filming with their phones, we'd been trapped for 38 minutes. The EMTs checked us over. Mild shock, elevated heart rates, but physically fine. A building engineer I'd never seen before was arguing with someone on his phone, his voice rising. "I don't care what the logs say. I'm looking at the goddamn cables right now and they're shredded." Leonard had disappeared. I found him 10 minutes later in the stairwell, sitting on the steps with his head in his hands. "They're going to shut us down," he said without looking up. I sat down beside him. "The whole building?" "Tower 3 at minimum. Maybe the whole complex. Depends on what else they find." He lifted his head, and I saw something in his expression I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. "This doesn't make sense. The inspection was clean. I saw the report myself." "Maybe something happened since then," I offered. "Cables don't degrade like that in 6 months, Nathan. Not unless something's wrong with them. Not unless they were wrong from the beginning." Nathan. That's my name. Nathan Cross. I'd been so locked into survival mode that I'd barely registered my own identity, but hearing it from Leonard snapped something back into place. This wasn't just about the elevator anymore. This was about the building, about Leonard's reputation, about Meridian Properties, about everything we'd built our careers on. "What are you saying?" I asked carefully. Leonard stood up, brushed off his pants. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the boardroom armor I knew so well. "I'm saying we need to cooperate fully with the investigation, document everything, and pray to God this was an isolated incident." He started down the stairs, stopped, looked back at me. "And Nathan? Don't talk to the press. Don't talk to anyone outside the company. This is going to get ugly before it gets better." He was right about that. By noon, the news vans were parked outside. By 3 p.m., the city had issued an emergency inspection order for all 6 elevators in the Meridian complex. By 5 p.m., I was sitting across from Detective Lisa Brennan, 15 years with the city's construction fraud unit, who explained that cable failures like this didn't just happen. "Someone cut corners," she said, sliding a photo across the table. It showed the cables up close, and even to my untrained eye, the damage looked wrong. Too clean. Too uniform. Or someone sabotaged them. I stared at her. "You think this was intentional?" "I think we're examining all possibilities. How long have you worked for Leonard Briggs?" 6 years. Ever notice any issues with building safety? Shortcuts in construction? Pressure to save money?" "No. Leonard's obsessive about quality. It's practically a religion with him." She made a note. "Tell me about the inspection 6 months ago. Were you involved?" "No. That's handled by facilities and the compliance team." "Who signed off on it?" I had to think. Gordon Whitfield. He's our head of compliance. We'll need to talk to him. And I'll need you to walk me through everything that happened this morning. Every detail. Start from when you got on the elevator." So I did. I told her about the coffee, about Leonard wanting me at the meeting, about Danny and Phillips joining us on 7, about the sound the cable made, about the fraying, about Leonard's reaction. She took notes the whole time, occasionally stopping me to ask for clarification. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You said Mr. Briggs seemed surprised, like he was seeing the cables for the first time." "Yeah. But he's the owner. He'd have access to all maintenance records, all inspection reports." "Of course. So either he didn't look, or someone lied to him," I finished. She didn't disagree. That conversation was on a Thursday. I know because I specifically checked my calendar afterward, relieved it hadn't been a Tuesday. By Friday morning, 3 more elevators had been red-tagged. The inspectors found similar damage to the cables in 2 of them. Not as severe as elevator 3, but enough to fail certification. The building's insurance company sent their own investigators. OSHA opened a file. The local news ran a segment featuring interviews with residents and office tenants, all expressing shock and fear. One woman held up her lease and said she was breaking it immediately. Consequences be damned. The property value of the entire complex dropped 14% overnight. Leonard held an emergency meeting with department heads at 8 a.m. Friday. I'd never seen him look like that, pale, hollow-eyed, like he hadn't slept. Maybe he hadn't. "The preliminary findings suggest manufacturing defects in the cable assemblies," he announced, his voice flat. "The supplier, Titan Industrial, is being investigated. Their parent company has already issued a recall notice for this specific cable series across 17 states. We were sold defective equipment 8 years ago, and it's been failing progressively ever since." Gordon Whitfield, sitting 3 seats down from me, cleared his throat. "The last inspection should have caught it. I'm reviewing the documentation now to understand what happened." "The inspector was on Titan's recommended contractor list," Leonard continued. "There's a possibility he was incentivized to overlook the defects. The state licensing board is investigating him as well." It all sounded plausible. Tragic, but plausible. A perfect storm of corporate negligence and regulatory failure that no one at Meridian could have predicted. Except I kept thinking about what Detective Brennan had said, about corners being cut, about someone lying. After the meeting, I went back to my office and did something I'd never done before. I started digging into files I had no business accessing. Meridian's document management system was extensive, but it wasn't particularly secure if you knew where to look. I'd set up half the folder structures myself over the years. I found the elevator maintenance contract, found the inspection reports dating back to installation, found correspondence between Titan Industrial and our purchasing department. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. An email chain from 7 years ago marked confidential between Leonard and someone named Austin Kovach at Titan Industrial. The subject line read, Cable Specifications, Cost Reduction Proposal. I opened it. My hands were shaking again. Kovach had written, Leonard, following up on our discussion. If we substitute the J-series cables with K-series in the Meridian installation, we can bring your cost down by $180,000. The K-series has identical load ratings and meets all code requirements. The only difference is service life, rated for 10 years instead of 15, but given typical usage patterns, you'll hit building system replacement cycles before that becomes an issue. Let me know if you want to move forward. Leonard's response, sent the same day. Austin, let's do it. Send updated contracts to Gordon for signature, but keep this between us. I don't want the change order flagged during inspection walkthroughs. I read it 3 times. Then I screenshot it and emailed it to my personal account before I could talk myself out of it. Then I sat there, staring at my screen, feeling the floor drop out from under me worse than the elevator had. Leonard had knowingly installed cheaper cables with shorter lifespans, had hidden it from inspectors, had saved $180,000 and gambled with the safety of everyone in the building. And now, 8 years later, those cables were failing. We'd almost died. We'd almost died because my boss, the man I'd respected and admired and modeled my career after, had chosen money over safety and covered his tracks. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my office until past midnight, pulling every file I could find related to the elevator installation, purchase orders, inspection logs, maintenance schedules, warranty documentation. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Gordon Whitfield's signature was on the modified contract, but there was a second email I found, dated 2 days before, where Leonard had told Gordon the change was pre-approved by the city inspector, and to just sign and process it. Gordon had trusted him. The city had never approved anything. The inspector, a guy named Thomas Morrow who'd since retired to Florida, had certified the installation based on documentation that claimed J-series cables were installed, except they weren't. The K-series cables looked identical. Same gauge, same fittings, same manufacturer label on the housings. Unless you knew exactly what to check, you'd never spot the substitution, and Leonard had made sure nobody knew what to check. By Saturday morning, I'd compiled a folder of evidence that would destroy Leonard's career and probably send him to prison. I should have felt righteous. Instead, I felt sick. This was the man who'd given me my first real job out of college, who'd mentored me, who'd stood as a reference when I bought my house, who'd sent flowers when my father died, and he'd lied to me, to all of us, had put our lives at risk to save a fraction of a percent on a multi-million-dollar construction budget. I called Detective Brennan at 9 a.m. Saturday. She answered on the second ring. Cross? Something wrong? I found something. Emails. Contracts. I think Leonard knew about the cables. Silence. Then, where are you? My office. Stay there. Don't talk to anyone. Don't send anything. I'm coming to you. She arrived 40 minutes later with another detective, a younger guy she introduced as Detective Alan Porter. They set up in a conference room, and I walked them through everything I'd found, showed them the emails, the contracts, the paper trail that proved Leonard had orchestrated the substitution and hidden it from regulators. Porter took notes. Brennan just listened, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she said, You understand what this means? What you're alleging? I understand. Your boss committed fraud, endangered hundreds of lives. If these cables had failed completely... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I know, I said quietly. We'll need the original files, everything you showed us. Can you provide those? I nodded, pulled out a thumb drive I'd prepared. It's all here, plus my statement, everything I know. Brennan took the drive. You did the right thing, Nathan. This took courage. It doesn't feel like courage. It never does. They arrested Leonard on Monday morning. I wasn't there. I'd called in sick, unable to face the office, unable to face the reality of what I'd set in motion. But I watched the news coverage from my apartment, saw him led out of the building in handcuffs, his lawyer shouting about presumption of innocence and wrongful prosecution. The charges were extensive: fraud, reckless endangerment, bribery of a public official. They'd discovered Leonard had paid Thomas Morrow $25,000 to sign off on the inspection without checking the cable specifications. Criminal negligence for every person who'd ridden those elevators in the past 8 years. Conspiracy to conceal material defects. The district attorney held a press conference and called it one of the most egregious cases of construction fraud she'd seen in 20 years. Titan Industrial's stock plummeted. Austin Kovach was arrested in Denver. Gordon Whitfield was questioned, but not charged. The evidence showed Leonard had lied to him. Danny Reeves and Phillips gave interviews describing the terror of hanging in that elevator, not knowing if the cables would hold. The building inspector who'd certified the Meridian Tower was suspended pending investigation. 3 other buildings in the state were found to have the same defective cables. 2 had already been evacuated. The lawsuits started within a week. Class action from the tenants. Individual suits from people claiming emotional distress. The city filed criminal and civil actions. Meridian Properties Board voted to remove Leonard and install interim leadership. The company's value collapsed. People I'd worked with for years lost their jobs. And through it all, I kept getting calls from reporters, from lawyers, from investigators, all wanting to know more about what I'd found and when I'd found it. I didn't talk to most of them. But I did sit down with an investigative journalist named Patricia Volkov, 23 years covering corporate crime, who was writing a long-form piece for the paper. We met at a coffee shop 3 weeks after the arrest. She had this way of asking questions that made you want to tell the truth, not because she was pushy, but because she genuinely seemed to care about getting it right. "How did you know to look?" she asked. I thought about it. I didn't, at first. But Leonard's reaction in that elevator, it wasn't just fear. It was recognition. Like he knew exactly what had gone wrong and why. That stuck with me. And when you found the emails? I almost deleted them. Almost convinced myself I was wrong, that there had to be another explanation. What changed your mind? The math. Those cables were 8 years old. We were 2 years away from the 10-year threshold. Leonard was going to wait until they failed completely, then blame it on the manufacturer, and no one would ever know about the substitution because the evidence would be destroyed in the investigation. We just got unlucky. The cables started failing early. If we'd been on that elevator 6 months later... I stopped. Couldn't finish. Patricia reached across the table, squeezed my hand briefly. "You saved lives. You know that, right? Those other buildings they evacuated. There are families who don't know you exist, but are alive because you spoke up. I just wish I'd known sooner." "You couldn't have. This was sophisticated, deliberate. Leonard Briggs built his entire career on being meticulous and trustworthy, and he used that reputation to hide what he was doing. That's not on you. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this." The trial started 8 months later. I testified for 3 hours, walking the jury through the documents, explaining the timeline, describing the elevator incident. Leonard's lawyer tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, but the evidence was overwhelming. The emails were authenticated. Austin Kovach had flipped and testified about the cable substitution scheme. Thomas Morrow, the inspector, testified about the bribe. Danny Reeves described the sound the cables made as they frayed, the way we'd all gone silent in that elevator, certain we were going to die. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, found Leonard guilty on 17 counts. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay $8.3 million in restitution to the victims and the city. Titan Industrial was fined $45 million and banned from public contracts. Austin Kovach got 8 years. Thomas Morrow lost his pension and got 3 years probation. Gordon Whitfield testified for the prosecution and was cleared of wrongdoing, but he left the industry anyway, said he couldn't trust his own judgment anymore. Meridian Properties filed for bankruptcy. The building was sold to a new ownership group who spent $12 million replacing every elevator system and conducting a complete safety overhaul. The new owners renamed it. Nobody wanted to be associated with what it had represented. I left the company a month after Leonard's arrest. Couldn't stay. Every hallway, every meeting room, every elevator, especially every elevator, reminded me of what had happened. What could have happened. I took a job with a nonprofit focused on construction safety advocacy. Turns out nearly dying in an elevator and exposing massive corporate fraud makes you pretty motivated to prevent it from happening to other people. I work with legislators now, pushing for stronger inspection requirements, better oversight of contractor relationships, mandatory third-party verification of safety-critical components. It's slower work than real estate development, pays less, but I sleep better. Most nights, anyway. The nightmares about being trapped in that elevator, about the cables snapping completely, about falling, those took about 2 years to fade. I still take the stairs whenever possible. 3 months after the sentencing, I got a letter. Prison mail. From Leonard. I almost threw it away unopened. Instead, I read it in my car in the parking lot, hands shaking the way they'd shaken that Thursday morning suspended between floors. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. It was an explanation. He wrote about the pressure of the construction business, about how everyone cuts corners, about how he'd thought the K-Series cables would be fine, about how it was just supposed to save money and no one was supposed to get hurt, about how he'd convinced himself the 10-year rating was conservative, that they'd last longer, that he'd have time to replace them before any problems emerged, about how he never meant for anyone to be in danger. Reading it, I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness. I wasn't there yet. Might never be there. But I understood. That's what scared me most. I understood the rationalization, the way you can convince yourself that a small compromise won't matter, that you're the exception, that you're smart enough to manage the risk, that the rules are too rigid and you know better. I understood because I'd made smaller versions of those choices myself, not with safety, not with anything that could kill someone, but with ethics, with honesty, with the lines between right and expedient. Leonard had just walked further down that path than most people, had stepped over lines that couldn't be uncrossed. And when confronted with the consequences of those choices, when hanging in an elevator with fraying cables above his head, he'd had to face what he'd done. I wrote back. One sentence. I hope you find peace, but I can't give you absolution. I never heard from him again. Danny Reeves reached out about a year after everything happened. We met for coffee, at a place on the first floor, naturally. He'd left maintenance work, gone back to school for engineering. I want to be the person who designs things right, he said, so nobody else has to wonder if the equipment they're using is going to kill them. He's graduating this spring, already has a job lined up with a firm that specializes in safety systems. I'll be at the ceremony. Phillips retired, sent me a Christmas card last year with a photo of him and his grandkids on a beach somewhere. The message inside said, "Every day's a gift. Thanks for making sure I got to see these faces grow up." I keep it on my refrigerator. Patricia Volkov's article won awards, used our story as a gateway to exposing an industry-wide pattern of safety shortcuts and regulatory capture, led to federal hearings, new legislation, real change. She calls me sometimes when she's working on new investigations, asks if I can connect her with sources or review technical documents. I always help. Detective Brennan retired from the fraud unit, but we get drinks every few months. She told me once that our case was the most clear-cut instance of someone doing the right thing at personal cost that she'd seen in her career. Most people want to do the right thing, she said. But when it costs them something, money, relationships, security, they find reasons not to. You didn't. I almost did, I admitted. Almost doesn't count. You followed through. That's what matters. The woman who'd held up her lease on camera, her name was Jennifer Wu, started a tenants' rights organization focused on building safety. We've worked together on several campaigns. She's fierce, unstoppable. Says almost dying made her realize she'd been sleepwalking through life. Now I'm awake, she told me, and I'm pissed off. Best combination for activism there is. Sometimes I think about that Thursday morning, about the sound, about the lurch, about how close we came. 3 feet. That's how much the emergency brakes let us drop before catching. 3 feet between normal and catastrophe. 3 feet between walking away shaken and not walking away at all. The engineers who examined the cables afterward told me we'd been minutes from complete failure, maybe less. The primary support was down to 30% integrity. One more stress point, someone shifting weight, the elevator moving between floors, any additional load, and it would have let go. The emergency brakes would have engaged, sure, but at free fall velocity from 15 floors up, they might not have held. We'd gotten lucky. Impossibly, absurdly lucky. And that luck had exposed something rotten that might have gone undiscovered for years. Might have killed dozens of people when it finally failed completely on a crowded Monday morning rush. I don't believe in fate or divine intervention or things happening for a reason. But I believe in consequences. I believe in choices. I believe that Leonard Briggs made a choice 8 years ago that seemed small to him in the moment. Save some money, cut a corner no one would notice, file it under business as usual, and move on. And I believe that choice rippled forward through time until it caught up with him in an elevator with 4 lives hanging by fraying threads. I believe I made a choice too, sitting in my office that Friday night, staring at those emails, knowing what they meant. I could have deleted them, could have convinced myself it wasn't my business, could have protected my career, my relationships, my comfortable life. I chose differently. That choice cost me too. I lost my job, my industry connections, my mentor, my sense of stability. Spent months looking over my shoulder, wondering if Leonard's lawyers would come after me, if the company would retaliate, if I'd be blackballed from ever working in real estate again. Spent nights unable to sleep, replaying the decision, second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd done the right thing or just blown up my life for nothing. But here's what I gained. I can look at myself in the mirror. I can ride in an elevator, when I absolutely have to, and know that I did everything in my power to make sure the cables are real, the inspections are honest, the safety margins are genuine. I can meet with families affected by construction negligence and tell them that sometimes the system works. That truth matters. That accountability is possible. I can stand at Danny's graduation and know that his career, his future, exists because we survived that morning, because the truth came out, because consequences followed actions. Jennifer Wu calls me a whistleblower. Detective Brennan calls me a witness. Patricia Volkov calls me a source. Danny calls me the reason he's still alive. I'm all of those things, I guess. But mostly, I'm just someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe the right place at the right time, and had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be when it mattered. The thing nobody tells you about moments like that is they don't feel heroic when you're in them. They feel terrifying. They feel like standing at the edge of a cliff with no idea if there's ground below or just more falling. You don't know if speaking up will change anything or just destroy you. You don't know if the truth will matter or if power will crush it. You don't know if you're brave or stupid. You just know you have to choose. I chose truth. And yeah, it cost me. But I'm still here. I'm still standing. I can still take an elevator, on the first floor only, and even then, reluctantly, without the weight of knowing I stayed silent when silence could kill. That's worth something. That's worth everything. Leonard Briggs is in year 4 of his sentence now. He'll be eligible for parole in 3 more years. I don't know if he'll get it. I don't know if he's learned anything, if he's genuinely remorseful, if he understands the magnitude of what he did. I don't know if he thinks about that Thursday morning the way I do, if he hears that sound in his nightmares, if he wakes up in cold sweats remembering how close we came. I hope he does. Not because I want him to suffer, but because I want him to understand. To really, truly understand that his choices had consequences. That the $180,000 he saved came with a price tag measured in lives and trauma and broken trust. That you can't cheat safety and expect the universe to let it slide. The frayed cables don't forget. The emergency brakes don't care about your intentions. The math doesn't negotiate. And somewhere in a federal prison, Leonard Briggs has 12 years to contemplate that reality. I've moved on. Mostly. Built a new career, new relationships, new sense of purpose. The nonprofit work is good, meaningful. Every building code we strengthen, every inspection protocol we improve, every safety standard we raise, that's a life potentially saved. That's another person who won't have to stand in an elevator listening to cables scream as they tear apart. That's another family who won't get the call that their loved one died because someone decided profit mattered more than people. Last month, we got a new elevator safety law passed. Mandatory third-party certification for all safety-critical components, with severe penalties for falsification. Random spot inspections by state engineers. Public databases of all inspection reports. Criminal liability for executives who knowingly approved defective equipment. It's called the Meridian Tower Act, named after the building where 4 people almost died because someone thought corners were meant to be cut. I testified at the signing ceremony. Stood there in front of cameras and legislators and safety advocates and told our story one more time. Told them about the sound, about the fraying cables, about the choice I made to speak up instead of stay silent, about why it matters. The governor shook my hand afterward, said I was a hero. I told her the same thing I tell everyone who says that. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who survived long enough to tell the truth. The heroes are the people like Danny Reeves who go into engineering to make sure it never happens again. The heroes are the people like Jennifer Wu who organize and advocate and push for change. The heroes are the inspectors who refuse to be bribed, and the journalists who investigate, and the detectives who build cases even when it's easier to let things slide. I just did what anyone should do when they find evidence of wrongdoing. I reported it. But I understand why people need heroes. Why they need to believe that speaking up makes a difference. That truth wins. That justice prevails. Because the alternative, the idea that Leonard could have gotten away with it, that those cables could have failed without anyone knowing why, that the next building might have the same problems and nobody would stop it, that's too dark to contemplate. So I let them call me a hero. I accept the handshakes and the thank yous and the awards. I give the speeches and do the interviews and tell the story again and again, even when I'm tired of telling it, even when the nightmares come back for a while after each retelling. Because every time I tell it, someone listens. Someone learns. Someone decides to check the cables in their building or report the corner cutting they've been witnessing or stand up to the boss who's pushing for cheaper alternatives to safety equipment. Someone chooses truth over comfort, and maybe that person saves a life. Maybe that person stops the next Leonard Briggs before 4 people end up trapped between floors, praying the emergency brakes hold, wondering if these are their last moments. Maybe that person makes the choice I made, earlier in the process, before anyone gets hurt. That's the ripple effect. That's the reason I keep talking about the worst morning of my life. That's why I still take the calls from reporters and researchers and documentary filmmakers who want to understand what happened and why it matters. Because it does matter. Because choices matter. Because the person who decides to save $180,000 by installing inferior cables needs to understand that they're not just shifting numbers on a spreadsheet. They're gambling with lives. They're betting that the math will work out, that nothing will go wrong, that they'll get away with it. And sometimes they do get away with it. Sometimes the cables hold. Sometimes the shortcuts don't catch up. Sometimes the Leonard Briggses of the world retire rich and respected, never facing consequences, never having to reckon with what they risked. But not this time. This time, the cables frayed at 9:14 on a Thursday morning. This time, 4 people survived to tell the story. This time, someone found the emails and made the call and chose truth over loyalty. This time, justice actually happened. I live with that. I carry it. The knowledge that I was in the right place at the right time, with the right access and the right conscience to make a difference. The burden of knowing that if I'd made a different choice, if I'd looked away, if I'd rationalized, if I'd prioritized my own comfort over doing what was right, Leonard might still be out there building death traps and calling them real estate developments. That weight doesn't leave, but it's different from the weight I would have carried if I'd stayed silent. That weight would have crushed me. This weight makes me stronger. There's a difference between the burden of action and the burden of inaction. The burden of action is heavy, but you can carry it. You can point to it and say, I did something. I tried. I stood up. The burden of inaction is heavier because it's hollow. It echoes. It whispers, what if, in the dark hours of the morning and never lets you answer. I chose the burden I could carry. And some days, that's enough. Some days, I can ride past the Meridian Tower. They renamed it the Summit Center, painted it, changed the lobby, tried to erase the association, and just see a building. Just see windows and concrete and steel. Not see the elevator shaft. Not hear the cables screaming. Not feel my stomach drop as the emergency brakes caught us and held us and gave us just enough time to be rescued. Some days, I can forget. But most days, I remember. And I'm okay with that. The remembering is part of the work. The nightmares are part of the price. The hypervigilance about safety, the compulsive stare-taking, the way my hands still shake sometimes when I hear metal under stress, those are the scars I carry from that Thursday morning. Scars are evidence of survival. Evidence that something tried to break you and failed. Evidence that you made it through. I made it through. We all did. Me, Danny, Phillips, Leonard, even if his making it through looked different from ours. We survived the elevator. We survived the investigation. We survived the trial and the aftermath and the rebuilding. We survived. And now I make sure others survive too. That's my work now. That's my purpose. Making sure the cables are rated correctly. Making sure the inspectors are honest. Making sure the corners don't get cut. Making sure that when someone steps into an elevator, they can trust that the people who built it, who maintain it, who certified it, actually did their jobs. That trust is fragile. It's built on 1,000 small choices made by people the public never sees. Engineers specifying the right materials, contractors installing them properly, inspectors verifying the work, building owners maintaining the systems, regulators enforcing the codes. Every one of those people has the power to cut a corner, to save some money, to make their lives easier, to assume it'll probably be fine. And most of the time, it probably is fine. Most of the time, the cables hold, the brakes work, the safety margins are sufficient. Most of the time, nobody dies. But most of the time isn't good enough when you're the person in the elevator on the day the cables fail. When you're the mother riding up to your apartment with your children. When you're the maintenance worker just trying to get to the 18th floor to fix an HVAC unit. When you're the senior project manager heading to a routine meeting with your boss. Most of the time doesn't cut it. Every time matters. Every choice matters. Every corner that doesn't get cut matters. I know that now. Learned it the hard way, hanging in a metal box, counting seconds, wondering if I'd ever see the ground again. Learned it in the weeks after, digging through files, finding evidence, making the choice to speak up. Learned it through the trial, the testimony, the sentencing, the aftermath. Learned it in the work I do now, every day, fighting for standards and oversight and accountability. I'm 34 years old. Been doing this work for almost 4 years now. Have maybe another 30 or 40 years of career ahead of me if I'm lucky. I'll spend every one of those years making sure what happened at the Meridian Tower doesn't happen again. Making sure Leonard Briggs was the last developer who thought he could trade safety for profit and get away with it. Making sure the next person who finds themselves in a failing elevator can look up at the cables and know they were installed right, inspected honestly, maintained properly. Know that someone, somewhere in the chain, chose to do the hard thing, chose to do the right thing, chose truth over convenience and safety over savings and people over profit. That's the legacy I want. Not hero, not whistleblower, not victim or survivor or any of the other labels people try to attach. Just someone who was there, who saw what was wrong, who said something, who made it matter. The cables failed at 9:14 a.m. on a Thursday in an elevator in the Meridian Tower. But the system held. The emergency brakes caught us. The rescue came. The truth emerged. Justice followed. Not because the system is perfect, God knows it isn't, but because enough people in enough places made choices that added up to accountability. I was just one of those people. Just one choice in a chain of choices. But it was my choice. My moment. My decision to look at those emails and not look away. And I'd make it again. Every time. Even knowing the cost. Even knowing what I'd lose. I'd make it again. Because that's who I want to be. That's who I am. Someone who, when the cables start to fray, doesn't just pray the brakes hold. Someone who checks to see why they're fraying in the first place. Someone who tells the truth even when the truth is terrifying. Someone who chooses right over easy. Every single time. The elevator fell 3 feet before the brakes caught us. Those 3 feet changed everything. Changed my career. Changed my understanding of the world. Changed my relationship to trust and authority and safety and truth. 3 feet of free fall that taught me more about who I am and who I want to be than 6 years of climbing the corporate ladder ever did. Was it worth it? Ask me on a bad day, when the nightmares are vivid and my hands won't stop shaking and I can't make myself step into an elevator no matter how much I need to, and I might not be sure. But ask me on a good day. Ask me when I'm testifying for a new safety law, or reading about a building that was evacuated before anyone got hurt, or getting an email from an inspector who found defective equipment because they'd heard our story and knew to check. Ask me then, and I'll tell you yes, it was worth it. It's always worth it. To speak up, to tell the truth, to choose right over easy, even when it costs you everything. Especially then, that's when it matters most. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.